How many warning signs do you need to see before admitting that something is wrong with your home? She still did not realize what had happened or how it would affect the people closest to her. But once it became obvious, there was no way back. Anyone can find themselves in a situation like that. Sarah only noticed the bin on the second day, even though it had been standing in the same spot for at least 6 years. That was its strength. It drew no attention. Gray with a dented lid, a worn blue municipal sticker, and an old crack along the side that in winter always exposed a black trash bag, as if the bin were trying to hide something from the neighbors and doing it without any dignity. That evening had been just as gray as all the others. Her job at the accounting office ran late because one client couldn't understand the difference between expenses and losses, even though both words were printed in large type. Then she stopped by the supermarket for milk, eggs, and something for dinner, which on the way home quietly turned into the idea of frozen pizza. The parking lot was cold and wet, not the kind of snow that crunches pleasantly underfoot, but a slushy mess that makes your shoes feel heavy and somehow choosy, like they don't belong to you. She got into her old Honda and didn't turn on the radio right away, because the radio usually annoyed her. The car smelled of a damp floor mat, coffee from a paper cup, and something sweet that had stuck to the armrest back in summer. On the passenger seat lay a small yellow tape measure keychain, like a cheap souvenir someone had given her at work, and that she had never thrown away for some reason. Sarah liked things like that. There was order in them. One button, one mechanism, one click. If something can be measured, it can be handled. She pulled out of the parking lot, neither fast nor slow, but in the way people drive when they don't want to hit anyone, and end up doing it more often because of that. At the corner, she had to yield to an oncoming pickup. Then some idiot in a hat crossed right in front of her hood, and she turned the wheel a little more than necessary. The car slipped on the wet edge, the left wheel clipped the side of a trash bin, and the bin didn't just fall, it seemed to hesitate, then collapsed with a sound as if it were filled not with soft garbage, but with an old set of pots. Sarah hit the brakes. The car jerked and stopped. For a second, everything else seemed to stop too. Somewhere far away on a neighboring street, a garage door slammed, and a dog barked once, short, businesslike, almost offended. The bin lay on its side, the lid torn off, spilling out a bag of coffee grounds, 2 empty cans, and something white that looked like a torn egg carton. In the dark, it was almost comical. If it hadn't been so awkward, as if someone had deliberately knocked over a stranger's house and was now waiting to see who would notice first. Sarah sat gripping the steering wheel, staring ahead. Then she slowly glanced in the rearview mirror, as if the answer might be there. The street was empty, no neighbors on their porches, no moving silhouettes, not even that annoying old woman across the street who always knew who took out their trash and when. Only her headlights, the bin, and the wet snow. She turned off the engine. That was the first bad decision. Not the worst, but the one after which everything else begins to fall into place on its own. If she had gotten out immediately, it might have ended with the bin, an apology, and at worst an unpleasant conversation. She knew that. And that was exactly why she didn't get out. Sarah was the kind of person who took too long to decide obvious things and then acted too quickly when it came to foolish ones. She sat there for a few more seconds, listening to her own breathing, then carefully opened the door and stepped into the cold. The air hit her face dry and sharp like a wet towel. The snow squelched underfoot. She walked around the front of the car and saw the damage up close, a pale streak on the bumper, and on the bin not just a dent but a tilt, like someone who had been about to say something polite and changed their mind. Sarah stood beside it, bent down, then straightened again. She didn't know what to do with her hands and shoved them into her coat pockets. "Damn," she said quietly. The word hung in the cold and went nowhere. She glanced at the windows of the neighboring houses. On the ground floor across the street, a television flickered, blue-white light jumping across the curtains. On the second floor, someone passed by a window without stopping. Sarah looked at the bin again, as if it might stand up and apologize on its own, and then did what she had always done when she felt ashamed. She tried to pretend there was nothing to be ashamed of. She lifted the lid as best she could and set the bin back on its wheels. One wheel was broken. It immediately leaned sideways. Sarah bit her lip, pulled it into place, then suddenly noticed a small piece of gray plastic that had fallen out. She picked it up, turned it in her fingers, and absent-mindedly slipped it into her pocket. Then she was surprised by the gesture, as if a pocket could save anything. The garage door of the house to the right opened. Light spilled onto the driveway and a neighbor appeared on the threshold, Jerry Moon, a man with narrow shoulders, wearing a winter jacket that was too big for him and a knitted hat pulled low over his forehead, as if he didn't trust the world. He stood with a mug in his hand, looking at the bin as though it had personally insulted his family. "Well then," he said. Not loudly, no shouting, just stating a fact. Sarah turned to him and immediately felt her mouth go dry. "Oh, Jerry, I'm sorry. I think I hit it." He nodded, took a sip from his mug and looked at the car. Looks like it? I can help put it back. It's already sort of standing, Jerry replied. It sounded almost polite. Almost. She smiled too quickly, too deliberately. I really didn't notice the road slippery. It's always slippery here, he said. That's just how it is. Sarah nodded and felt she should say something else, because the silence was already becoming suspicious, but she didn't know what. All that came out was, sorry. Jerry looked at her the way people look at someone who has just dropped a cup and is already preparing to explain it with the laws of physics. Yeah, he said after a pause. It's nothing, happens. It wasn't said like forgiveness, it sounded like the beginning of something more unpleasant. Sarah noticed a small camera above his front door. Cheap, black, with a red light. She knew people installed those sometimes for packages, sometimes to monitor snow, and most often to see which neighbors were lying. The camera was pointed straight at her car. Is that a new system? She asked, immediately realizing it was a stupid question. Jerry didn't turn around. Yeah, my son put it in, said it's safer now. Of course, Sarah said. That makes sense. She didn't even understand why she added that word makes sense. As if a tipped-over trash bin could be part of a reasonable world. Jerry took another sip of coffee and said, you might want to be more careful. People around here are fond of their bins. He didn't smile, but there was something like dry mockery in his voice. Sarah nodded again, too quickly again, and felt the urge to disappear into her car through the glass. I'll pay for everything tomorrow if needed. We'll see, he said. Don't worry. And in that phrase, there was more threat than in any shout. Sarah came home with the feeling that in her pocket she wasn't carrying a piece of plastic, but a small mistake that had already learned how to breathe. In the hallway, she took off her coat, set the grocery bags on the floor, and stood there for a long time without turning on the light. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. A water bill lay folded in half on the table. The microwave clock read 9:17 and was 2 minutes ahead of the other clocks in the house, as if the house itself wanted to hurry things along. She took the piece of plastic out of her pocket, sat down at the table, turned it under the lamp. Just a broken mounting fragment, ribbed along the edge with a dirty rubber mark. Nothing special, but she didn't throw it away. Instead, she placed it next to the tape measure keychain, as if two small things could create order. Her partner, Ray, came out of the bedroom wearing an old t-shirt with the expression of someone awakened not by noise but by a mood. Why aren't you sleeping? He asked. Nothing, Sarah said. He looked at the table, at the plastic, at her hands. What's that? Nothing important. You don't usually have nothing important on the table. She gave a short, unsuccessful smile. I hit Jerry's bin. Ray paused. Hit it? Yeah, not hard, and that's it. I stopped. Everything's fine. He leaned against the door frame and crossed his arms. If everything's fine, why do you look like that? Sarah wanted to snap back, but instead just exhaled. Politeness wasn't helping anymore, but she still clung to it like a handrail in a dark stairwell. Because I don't like other people's cameras. That's why Ray looked at her a little longer than necessary. What cameras? Sarah froze. Wrong thing. Again. She could already feel a small lie beginning to crack beneath her feet, even though she hadn't really lied yet. No cameras, just he's got something above the door. It's nothing. Ray nodded, as if accepting it, but not believing it. All right, then tomorrow you tell Jerry you're properly sorry. I already did. Properly, he repeated. She looked at him. He looked at her, and both of them understood it wasn't about the bin anymore. But neither of them said it out loud. Later, lying in the dark, Sarah couldn't fall asleep for a long time. What stayed in her mind wasn't the sound of the impact, but the strange, almost domestic silence after it. Again and again, she imagined the bin rolling over wet snow, the lid clattering, Jerry stepping onto the porch with his mug, the camera above his door blinking red, and she kept thinking about the small piece of plastic now lying on the kitchen table next to the tape measure, as if they were some kind of useful pair. A car passed outside, slowly tires whispering through the slush. Then it was quiet again, and in that silence, the bin in someone else's yard had already stopped being just a bin. In the morning, the bin looked worse than it had at night. At night, it had just been dented, almost funny in its awkwardness, but by morning, it had become an official problem. Overnight, the snow had crusted over with a thin layer of ice, and around it lay dirty footprints, someone's careful circle, then a second, then another, as if a neighbor had twice tried to decide whether to be angry or just let it go. Sarah saw it from the kitchen window while standing with a cup of coffee, staring into the backyard as if an answer might appear there. The coffee was too strong, almost bitter, tightening her stomach. She hadn't slept well. She had drifted off a couple of times, only to wake immediately with the same feeling that she had forgotten something, not in the house, but in life itself. The tape measure keychain lay on the table. Next to it was the gray piece of plastic she had picked up from under the bin the day before. She had placed it on a paper towel so it wouldn't dirty the table, and now she looked at it the way people look at something small that has suddenly refused to remain small. Ray had already left. In the morning, he had only muttered something about the road and left his mug with dried coffee in the sink. He always left mugs like that, as if they weren't dishes but witness statements. Sarah washed it automatically, not because she wanted cleanliness, but because she needed something to do with her hands. She picked up the tape measure, pulled out the metal strip, clicked the lock, and suddenly caught herself counting the steps to the door. Not on purpose. Just to check. 7 steps to the back door, 3 to the table, 5 to the window. She had always liked things like that, numbers, distances, order, but today order didn't calm her. Today it only showed how much there was that couldn't be hidden in time. She pulled on her jacket, slipped the tape measure into her pocket, and stepped outside. The cold hit her face immediately without ceremony. The air was clean dry, carrying the smell of frozen ground, old asphalt, and damp wood. The snow crunched underfoot, but not pleasantly, not festively, short and sharp, as if the yard itself resented being disturbed. Sarah walked toward the bin, stopped at a distance, and studied it as carefully as she had the night before. Then she bent down, peered into the hollow under the wheel, and noticed a mark. A thin black streak of paint on the ice, barely visible. She crouched and ran her finger across it. The streak was fresh. That meant she hadn't just hit the bin, possibly the curb as well, which meant there could be more traces. It was not a good thought, but it was a practical one. Sarah lived as if a problem could be reduced if it was measured precisely enough. She took out the tape measure and, without thinking, began measuring the distance from the bin to the tire track in the road. One end of the tape caught on a lump of ice, and she tugged harder than necessary. The lump flew off, struck the metal leg of the bin, and shattered with a pitiful crack. The sound seemed too loud. She froze, listening. Silence. Then somewhere behind her, a garage door creaked. Right, she muttered to herself. Great. Her neighbor Jerry stepped out onto the porch in the same jacket and the same knitted hat as the day before, as if he hadn't slept at all. He held a mug, though now it seemed to contain something like tea, murky and astringent. He didn't wave or greet her right away. He just stood there watching her kneel beside a trash bin with a tape measure, as if this were a normal morning for a normal person. So you decided to take another look, he said at last. His voice was polite, too polite. Sarah stood up so quickly she almost lost her balance. Yes, I wanted to understand how bad it is. Bad, Jerry said, but not fatal. He took a sip, then glanced at the footprints around the bin. People from across the street have already been here. And me, to be honest, you drove off pretty confidently yesterday. She felt a muscle twitch in her cheek. I was scared. I understand, he nodded. It happens. The way he said I understand made it clear he understood nothing at all, but considered it proper to remain courteous. That was worse than open anger. Anger at least was honest. This was clean, careful suspicion. Sarah decided to push gently. If you want, I can pay for a replacement bin. Jerry looked at her with the patience reserved for someone offering to fix a cracked foundation with an apology card. Well, if that's what's appropriate, he said, though I'd prefer to understand what actually happened first. Nothing special happened. She said it too quickly. Jerry narrowed his eyes slightly. Uh-huh. He added nothing more, and that was what made her palms itch. Across the street, an elderly woman in a blue housecoat over a puffer jacket opened her door and carried out a bag of trash. Seeing Sarah, Jerry, and the bin in the middle of the yard, she did what everyone in the neighborhood did when they sensed someone else's embarrassment. She pretended she had just stepped outside for some air. Good morning, she said too cheerfully. Good morning, Mrs. Haas, Jerry replied. Good morning, Sarah echoed. She said it so seriously, as if there weren't a dented bin in the yard and a second day of strange silence hanging over everything. Mrs. Haas nodded, adjusted her grip on the bag, looked at the bin, then at Sarah, then at Jerry. I hope everything is all right, she said. Politeness here had become almost absurd. The three of them stood among ice and trash like participants in a bad meeting, where no one wanted to speak first. Yes, Jerry said, we're managing. Sarah stayed silent too long, and by the time she gathered herself to say something, Mrs. Haas had already gone back inside. That was worse than if she had stayed. Jerry shifted his gaze toward Sarah's house. I checked the camera, he said. My porch cam feeds into an app. My son set it up, says it's convenient. Sarah felt the cold crawl along her spine, even though she was already standing in the frost. And on the recording, your car makes a very careful loop. Then a second, then another. Doesn't look like an accident, she smiled, wrongly, tightly. I told you, the road is slippery. Yes, Jerry said. You say a lot of correct things. She had no answer for that. He set his mug on top of the bin, then bent down, picked up a small gray piece of plastic from the ground, one she hadn't noticed the day before, and turned it between his fingers. What's this? Sarah flinched. Nothing. Probably from the bin. Probably, he repeated. He looked at the plastic, then at her hands, then back at her, and Sarah suddenly understood that it was no longer just a piece. Something in his eyes told her he had noticed. Not just the license plate, not just the trunk, not just her sorry, but also the fact that she had come back in the morning and started measuring. Can I take that? She asked. Jerry shrugged. If it's yours. It was said almost gently, almost like a joke, but she didn't smile. It's not mine. Then I suppose it belongs to no one, he said. Strange, isn't it? Sarah held out her hand, but he didn't give her the plastic immediately. He held it between his thumb and forefinger for a second, then finally placed it in her palm. The gesture was careful, businesslike, almost polite. That only made it worse. She took the piece, their fingers barely touched. You don't have to turn this into a problem, she said, surprising herself. Jerry looked at her as if she had just admitted to something more than hitting a bin. And who said I'm the one turning it into a problem? He asked. The pause stretched long. Everything was visible inside it, the snow, her car's trunk, the camera above his door, his mug, her damp boots, the Chujoy trash bin that now knew too much. Sarah nodded slowly. All right, she said, I understand. No, Jerry replied. Not really, not yet. He said it without threat, and that was exactly why the phrase stuck in her head. She turned to leave. But just then, the red light on the camera above Jerry's porch blinked again. Sarah glanced at it and instinctively touched her pocket where the tape measure lay. It felt heavier now, as if the small plastic piece inside already knew someone would be looking for it. Back inside, the first thing she did was place the tape measure on the table and set the gray plastic piece beside it. Then she pulled out an old envelope, some receipts, and a utility bill, as if paper could help her build a defense. The kitchen was quiet, too quiet for a morning that had already delivered its first bad continuation. She examined the tape measure more closely. Along the metal strip near the edge, there was a thin, dark line, maybe dirt, maybe paint. Sarah rubbed it with her finger. The mark didn't disappear. She sat down, placed her hands on the table, and stared at the window. Reflected in the glass were her face, the mug, the tape measure, the paper bills. Everything looked as if someone had carefully arranged future trouble. Her phone vibrated on the table. One short message from Ray, don't forget to buy milk, and don't lie to me if something's wrong. She read it twice, then a third time. Her fingers grew cold, even though the house was warm. Sarah slowly typed a reply, then deleted it, then typed again. Everything's fine, deleted that too. In the end, she sent only, okay, and immediately knew that this was another mistake, because now she didn't even have a convincing lie, only traces and ice that had already begun to hold them in place. Bad ideas rarely arrive looking bad. They usually feel like relief. That was exactly how it seemed to Sarah that morning, not like a criminal plan, but like a way to finally stop feeling as if a small cold stone were lodged under her skin. She sat in the kitchen with her legs tucked under her, staring at the tape measure keychain lying beside her cup. The gray piece of plastic she had shoved into a drawer late the night before, then taken out again and put back on the table, unable to decide whether to throw it away or keep it. There was nothing special about it. But those were the things that broke lives. Not dramatic evidence, but small, dirty, inexpensive details with nowhere to go. Outside, the yard looked almost respectable. Overnight, the snow had hardened. The morning light was dim with a bluish tint, and Jerry's trash bin, standing crooked by the curb, looked less like a tragedy and more like a stubborn error in the landscape. If you looked quickly, you could almost pretend it wasn't her. Just wind, just a wheel, just a bad day for a container. Ray had already left. He'd left behind an open cabinet door, a damp patch on the bathroom floor, and the sense that the questions he wasn't asking were growing heavier in the silence. Sarah knew he didn't believe her. Everything's fine. And that was exactly why she wanted to do something that looked like normality. Fix it, restore it, balance it out. She had almost finished her coffee when the phone rang. Jerry's name lit up on the screen. She stared at it long enough for the call to go to voicemail. Then the phone fell silent. Her mouth went dry instantly. A minute later, he called again. She didn't answer. Only on the third call did she pick up, because staying silent any longer seemed more suspicious than answering. Hello? A pause. This is Jerry Moon, he said. His voice was even polite, almost dry from across the street. About yesterday? Yes, of course, Sarah said. I remember. Good. I just wanted to utachnit whether you're planning to, well, check things again today. He chose the word check very carefully, as if it were too simple for what he really meant. No, she said too quickly. Of course not. Uh-huh. She could hear his silence on the line, and it was worse than a direct accusation. I can pay for something, she added, if a wheel or the lid needs replacing. I heard you, Jerry said. That's not really the issue. Then what is? Another pause. The issue is that on the camera, yesterday your car makes a loop, then a second, then another, and after that you come back to the bin on foot. That's a little strange. Sarah gripped the phone so tightly her fingers turned white. I was just checking if I'd hit anything else. I see, he said. Seems like a habit. She wanted to say he was wrong, but realized any word now would only repeat what already hung between them. So she chose politeness. I'm sorry if it looks strange. It's fine, Jerry said. Happens around here, and he hung up without saying goodbye. Sarah stared at the phone for a moment, then opened the call log and, with irritation, noticed he hadn't only called her. There was another missed number, unfamiliar but local, which meant this was no longer personal, which meant someone else had already asked about her. She went to the window and saw Jerry on his side of the street measuring something near the bin. Not the bin itself, but the tracks around it. He stood with his hands in his pockets, bending down, straightening up, stepping back, bending again, as if performing some small and very important domestic ritual. A small tape measure lay beside him. Not hers, of course, his own, but that somehow made the sight almost offensive. Sarah felt her face grow hot. Right, she muttered. That was when the bad idea came. Not as a flash, but as a quiet, practical decision. If Jerry was already behaving like someone ready to suspect, then she needed to make sure the suspicion fell somewhere else. On someone already not particularly liked. The neighbor across the street, Mark Wells, fit perfectly, always arguing about parking, complaining about noise, once even calling the police because Jerry had used a drill at 6 in the morning. He drove an old dark gray car that looked like a shed on wheels, and he had the kind of personality that always seemed to know a little more than it said. Sarah didn't like Mark, which made him convenient. She opened the hallway closet, took out gloves, then put them back, suddenly deciding gloves would look too obvious. In the end, she took only a trash bag and the tape measure keychain. The small piece of plastic she slipped into her pocket, not as evidence anymore, but as a backup mechanism that might come in handy if everything went really wrong. Which, as a rule, it did. Outside, the air was still gray and sharp. The yards all looked the same, as if the neighborhood had been built from a single tired template. Porch, steps, tire tracks, a dull fence, a trash bin, more tracks. Sarah walked to Jerry's bin, paused and glanced around. No one. Only the camera above the door, a small black dot with a red light. She turned away from it and walked to Mark's container. It stood by the house as usual, half buried in snow and wind. Sarah crouched as if tying her shoe and quickly looked around. Nearby lay a broken plastic lid from someone's bucket, and it was as ridiculous as it was convenient. She picked it up, examined its shape, then glanced at her pocket. The piece from Jerry's bin was too small and too gray, but in trash, if luck held, that wouldn't matter. What mattered was that someone would find the wrong thing in the wrong place and draw exactly the conclusion she needed. She lifted the lid of Mark's bin, slipped the gray plastic piece inside, and pressed it down under a bag filled with old boxes. Then she stood still for a second, looking at the result. Everything looked too neat, too clean. That was always bad. A proper wrongdoing should at least smell a little like desperation. Sarah decided it wasn't enough. Mark needed a visible motive, a small, irritating, everyday detail. She remembered his habit of placing his trash bin half a meter farther out than everyone else's, so it stuck almost onto the sidewalk. Once in a bad mood, Jerry had already argued about it, so it could look like Mark had knocked something over again, clipped something, driven carelessly, an ordinary small thing that later made people stand in the yard with innocent faces. Sarah crossed the yard and, relying on the assumption that Mark was in his basement, nudged his bin slightly closer to the road. Not much, a couple of inches, but it was enough for her to feel almost like a master of someone else's fate. And then Mrs. Haas appeared from around the corner. She carried a bag of frozen vegetables and looked at Sarah with that polite attentiveness possessed by people who neither want to intrude nor miss a single detail. Sarah froze. "Good morning," said Mrs. Haas. "Good morning," Sarah replied. A pause. "Colder today," the old woman remarked. "Yes," Sarah said. "Properly so." It was a terrible conversation, even for a neighborhood where nothing was usually discussed beyond the weather and the price of salt. Mrs. Haas shifted her gaze to the bin, the snow, Sarah's hands in her pockets, then back to Sarah. "Are you looking for something?" There it was. Politeness as a knife, not sharp, not shiny, just the kind that cuts without effort. "No," Sarah said too quickly. "Just checking if I might have hit something here yesterday too." "Uh-huh," said Mrs. Haas. "Well, it happens." She said it almost exactly the way Jerry had, and Sarah suddenly realized the whole neighborhood already knew something had happened. Not an event, not an accident, but an awkwardness. In this place, people didn't necessarily see everything, but they always sensed where someone had lied. Sarah nodded as if the conversation were over and began backing toward her car. But as she stepped off the curb, her heel caught on a crust of ice. She jerked to keep her balance and the gray piece of plastic slipped from her pocket. It fell into the snow almost silently. She didn't notice. Mrs. Haas did. The old woman said nothing. She only tilted her head slightly and looked at the snow the way one looks at a poorly hidden note. Sarah got into the car and immediately regretted coming out at all. Her hands were trembling. She started the engine but didn't drive right away. She sat there staring through the windshield at the yard, the bin, the neighbor's windows at Mrs. Haas, who was already calmly walking home with her bag of frozen vegetables, as if nothing had happened. That was the worst part. People never react when they should. They just keep walking with their groceries. On the back seat lay an old gym bag. Sarah suddenly remembered she had put her winter mittens there the day before, along with a supermarket receipt and a folder of papers she meant to sort later. She reached back and found the folder. Inside were receipts, her car insurance, and a printed utility payment, paper order, proof of a normal life. It all seemed almost ridiculous now. She flipped through the pages, hoping numbers and structure would calm her, but instead noticed a line on one of last week's receipts. Purchase of new home security cameras for the house across the street. Next to the date, Jerry Moon. She stared at the receipt, then at the yard. It wasn't the kind of document that ruins a life, not yet, but there was something wrong in it, like the first sound before a fall. Sarah folded the receipt back, shoved the folder under the seat, and pulled away, not fast, carefully, like someone who had already hit a trash bin once and now tried to drive as if the street itself were watching. At the end of the block, she glanced in the mirror and saw Jerry standing by his house, watching her leave. He didn't wave, didn't look angry, just watched the way one watches something that's already hard to call accidental. Sarah turned the corner and only then exhaled. She didn't yet understand what exactly she had made worse. She only felt it. Now the story had a second set of tracks, and that meant the first one was no longer the most dangerous. The phone rang at 10:27, just as Sarah still hadn't decided whether to treat the receipt as evidence or just a bad coincidence. She sat at the kitchen table, a cooled mug in front of her, a folder of papers beside it that she had already flipped through 3 times without any result. Outside it was bright, but the light didn't help. It only made the yard cleaner and the problem clearer. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Sarah didn't answer right away. Only on the second call did she pick up, because silence in situations like this was always worse than a response. "Hello?" A pause. "Ms. Morgan," a man's voice asked. "Yes, this is Officer Helms, County Department. We have a few questions regarding an incident on Lakeview Drive." Sarah slowly set her mug down. "An incident?" "Yes, ma'am. Minor. Nothing urgent. Just clarifying a few details." The word minor sounded carefully chosen, as if meant to reassure, and because of that, it made things worse. "I'm not sure I understand," Sarah said. "That's fine. We'd like you to come in today at 11. 15 minutes, no more. If that works." His tone was even, almost friendly, the kind of voice used to ask someone to fill out a form or pick up a forgotten item from a laundromat. That was exactly why the back of Sarah's neck prickled. "What is this about?" she asked. "Better to discuss in person. Is this about the bin?" A pause. Very short, but enough. "Yes, ma'am, and your vehicle." Sarah closed her eyes for a second. "All right," she said. "I'll come. Thank you, and please don't worry. These things happen." He said it like he was talking about rain, and that was how she knew it was already too late not to worry. When she hung up, her hands were cold, though the kitchen was warm. She opened the closet, took out her most neutral sweater, gray, plain, the kind that made people look less guilty, and stood in front of the hallway mirror for a long time, trying to decide what innocence looked like. In the end, she chose what everyone chose: calm, composed, slightly tired. Ray was home. He sat in the living room, watching something on mute, holding a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. "Where are you going?" he asked as she passed. "To the station." "About the car?" He didn't respond immediately, just shifted his gaze to her face. "About the car," he repeated. "Yes. They want to clarify a few details." "What kind of details?" "I don't know." He set his cup down carefully, almost pedantically, as if the motion might straighten not just the cup, but the conversation itself. "Sarah," he said, "were you holding something back from me last night?" She stopped at the door. "No. Your voice right now sounds like someone who already lied and can't remember to whom." It wasn't said harshly. That made it land harder. "I just hit a trash bin," she said. "That's all." "Then why is the police calling you in?" "To ask questions about a bin?" "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look from someone who doesn't want to be right, because being right in situations like this is always unpleasant. "All right," he said finally. "Just don't turn it into more than it is." Sarah almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because that was exactly what she had been doing from the start. "I'm trying not to." She left before he could respond. The station was cramped, like a poorly arranged post office. It smelled of coffee, wet clothes, and old paper. A water dispenser hummed in the hallway as if it disapproved of everything. A road safety poster hung on the wall, next to a crooked flyer about a missing cat. Together, it made the place feel both more official and less serious. Officer Helms was waiting in a small office with 2 chairs, a desk, a folder, and a travel mug with a sports team logo. He was neither young nor old, the kind of man who quickly became part of the furniture in any town. Short haircut, clean-shaven, sleeves rolled to the elbows. A tablet and a printed sheet lay on the desk, a blue pen resting on top. "Ms. Morgan, please sit," he said. "Thank you." She sat, the chair creaked. "Water?" "No, thank you." "Coffee?" "No." "All right." He didn't rush. Opened the folder, closed it, opened it again, giving her time to understand that he knew exactly what he was doing. It was a small kind of authority, but those were the most unsettling ones, because they required no effort. "We have footage from Mr. Moon's porch camera," he said. "Your vehicle, timestamp yesterday, 21:43. I already said I hit the bin." "Yes, ma'am, I can see that." He turned the tablet toward her. On the screen was her car, angled awkwardly, the same clumsy turn, then the stop, then her figure near the bin. She looked small, stiff, and unmistakably guilty. Sarah had never liked seeing herself on camera. Now even less. "That's you?" Helms asked. "Yes? You exited the vehicle?" "Yes, twice." She blinked. "Twice, yes. First, immediately after impact. Second, about 8 minutes later." Something cold settled inside her. She didn't remember the second time, not because it hadn't happened, but because her mind had chosen not to keep it. "I might have checked if I hit anything else," she said. "Might have," he echoed, "and you stayed by the bin for a while." "I was trying to set it up right." "I understand." He nodded very seriously, too seriously for something this trivial, and that made it more absurd, as if they weren't discussing a trash bin, but an escape plan. "The issue is," he continued, "we have another recording from the gas station on the corner. It shows you on the phone as you approach your street, and later you return to the neighboring yard." Sarah didn't answer immediately. Somewhere in the hallway, someone laughed loudly, coughed. A door slammed. Life continued outside the office as if nothing had happened. "I don't remember saying anything important," she said. "That usually works in our favor," Helms replied dryly. She looked up slightly. He wasn't smiling. The remark seemed accidental. "Those were the ones that hit hardest." "Were you looking for something?" he asked. "No." "Are you sure the question wasn't about objects? It was about motive, about fear, about why someone returns to a neighbor's bin at night if everything is truly insignificant." "I was worried," she said. "I wanted to make sure I hadn't hurt anyone." Helms folded his hands on the desk. "And that's why you drove in the opposite direction from your home afterward?" She stayed silent. He slid the printed sheet toward her, a grainy still image, her car, the houses, the bins, and a small blurred figure near a neighbor's container. In the second image, she stood closer, bent over, as if placing something inside. Sarah stared at it and suddenly remembered everything clearly. The gray plastic in her pocket, the wet snow, Mrs. Haas on the walkway, and that strange feeling of being almost invisible as she drove away. The image showed the opposite. She had been very visible. "Was anyone else there?" Helms asked. "No, you're sure?" Not an accusation, an invitation to lie again, only worse. Sarah swallowed. "Yes, because Mr. Moon says he saw a woman near his bin this morning. And it wasn't you." That was the first truly unpleasant turn in the conversation. Not loud, not dramatic, just uncomfortable, like taking off your shoes and realizing there's more dirt than you were willing to admit. "What woman?" Sarah asked. "We're still verifying." Her heart thudded harder. "Is he filing a complaint?" "Not at this time. He just wants to know who's been handling his container." Sarah tilted her head slightly. "He said it wasn't a big deal." "People often say things they don't mean when they're upset," Helms said. "Seems like a local tradition around here." Sarah didn't respond. She sat very straight, too straight, and noticed that she wasn't trembling entirely, only in her hands. Helms watched her carefully. "Do you have a reason for returning to the bin twice?" "I already told you. Tell me again." "I wanted to fix it." "Fix what?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. That was the worst part. The question was simple, but the answer was no longer safe. "Nothing," she said finally. "I just got mixed up." He nodded as if expecting that. "I see. Did you go to your neighbor across the street yesterday morning?" She froze. "No." "Uh-huh." He turned the tablet back, scrolled through a few frames and tapped the screen. "Here you are by his house." Sarah looked at the image and felt everything inside drop. A small mistake, just a few minutes by someone else's bin. And now she was at another house in another recording and another version of events. "I might have gone the wrong way," she said. "Might have." Helms repeated. His voice stayed even. That was what made it sharp. He closed the folder. "Ms. Morgan, this doesn't look like a serious case, but it does look like a very strange sequence of small decisions, and people rarely make those alone." Sarah looked up. "What does that mean?" Helms shrugged. "It means cameras usually don't lie. People often do. At that moment, the office door cracked open and a desk officer leaned in. "Helms," he said, "you've got another statement about the bin and a broken lid from Moon, and someone else called about a car near his house." Said it came back. Helms nodded like someone whose day was unfolding exactly as expected. "Thanks," he said. The door closed. The air in the room felt thicker. "Who called?" Sarah asked. Helms looked at her, then at the folder. "That's what we're going to find out, Mrs. Morgan." And with that, the conversation stopped being about a bin entirely. After the station, Sarah drove home slowly, even though the road was empty and nothing stood in her way. After conversations like that, people always drive slowly, not out of caution, but because something inside them has shifted and it's no longer clear what the steering wheel is attached to. The yard looked different. Not because of the snow or the light was the same dull gray as before. It was because now she knew that someone in the house across the street had been looking at her car. Not as a car, but as footage that changed everything. Even the trash bin now looked like an object under investigation. Big, stupid, motionless, almost dignified. Ray was at work, which helped, because Sarah didn't want to explain anything or listen to anything. She put the kettle on, realized there wasn't enough water, then noticed a crack along the handle of a mug in the sink and stood staring at it for a long time, as if deciding something important. In the end, she threw it away, even though she had been telling herself for 2 months she would fix it. Strange how quickly small things become unbearable when a larger mistake is nearby. Her phone lay on the table. Sarah looked at it for a minute, then another, and decided to call someone she didn't like but had once helped, and who therefore owed her. That was how many local relationships worked. Not friendship, not trust, but a memory of small favors that later became difficult to deny. His name was Todd Blaine. He ran a garage on the outskirts and did a bit of everything. Oil changes, stripping plates from wrecked cars, patching up things that probably shouldn't be touched. People like him always said they didn't do anything serious. That was why they were feared less than they should be. He answered on the 4th ring. "Yeah, this is Sarah Morgan." Pause. "Oh," he said. "Right. Hi." He didn't sound surprised, more cautious, like someone who expected either money or trouble and knew both conversations would be unpleasant. "I need you to look at my car," she said. "What's wrong with it?" "A couple of scratches, and I don't want to take it to a regular mechanic." "A regular one? Huh," he muttered. "Now that's interesting." "Todd, all right, bring it by the garage. Just not at noon. There are people around at noon." She thanked him and hung up, then sat still for a moment, realizing she had just done another thing that looked bad from the outside. When people get into trouble, they usually look for the truth first. Sarah was looking for a way to make the truth less visible. Todd's garage sat behind a gas station, in a dip where the snow was always dirtier than anywhere else. The doors were half closed, a dim light flickering above, 2 old pickup trucks without plates nearby, and a minivan that clearly no longer carried anyone but hadn't yet agreed to die. Inside smelled of oil, rubber, and cold metal. The smell was familiar enough to be almost comforting. Todd came out himself, thin, long-faced, with a habit of rubbing his hands even when it wasn't cold. He wore a work jacket with a paint stain on the shoulder. He always looked like he slept in the garage and then decided not to change. "You're late," he said instead of greeting her. "I was passing by." Of course, the way he said it made it clear he didn't believe a word, but was willing to hear the rest. Sarah drove the car inside. Todd walked around it, crouched by the bumper, ran his finger along the fresh paint mark, then stood and looked at her. "You hit something? A bin." "A bin," he repeated. "Funny, there's nothing funny about it." "No, why not? Bins are great, convenient, quiet, no questions." She didn't respond. Todd opened the hood, though it was clearly unnecessary, closed it, opened it again. Pure habit, the performance of someone showing he was doing something. That, too, was part of the local theater. People who couldn't help always made a few technical gestures. "You just need to touch up the lower part," he said. "Maybe replace a bracket. Nothing serious? And if someone already saw it?" "Who? My neighbor." "Which neighbor? You've got 15 of them?" Sarah sighed. "Jerry Moon." Todd raised his eyebrows. "The one with the cameras?" She froze. "You know him?" "The whole area knows him, likes order more than politeness." Rare combination. Sarah stayed silent, and Todd seemed to understand he had hit the right spot. "What have you already done?" he asked. "Nothing. You're not lying. You're pausing." That's also an answer. She looked down at the floor. On the concrete lay an old bolt, a scrap of tape, a cigarette butt, and a small plastic tie, things that meant nothing, which was exactly why they fit so easily beside someone else's mistakes. "They called me in," she said finally. Todd went quiet. "Over the bin, over the car, and what did you tell them?" "The truth." He gave a short, humorless huff. "No, try again." She snapped her head up. "I didn't ask for a lecture. I'm not giving one. I'm just amazed how people manage to make a simple thing expensive. It sounded almost mild, almost friendly. That made it worse. Todd went to the workbench, pulled out a rag and a can of polish. Let me see your keys. She handed them over. Alarm system working? Yes. Plates clean? Yes. You sure? She didn't answer. Todd nodded, as if expecting that. Then he leaned toward the rear bumper and noticed something. What's that? Where? He ran his finger along a small dent, then picked up a gray plastic fragment from the floor, something that must have fallen when she took her keys out. Sarah didn't recognize it immediately. Then she did. It wasn't from her car. It was the same gray piece from the bin, the one she had carried with her. She must have dropped it without noticing. Todd held it in his palm. Where did this come from? Nothing, she said too quickly. Just trash. Trash doesn't sit neatly by your feet. He looked at her. She felt that something important was happening, even though it looked like an ordinary conversation in a garage. Those were the moments everything fell apart. You picked this up near the bin? He asked. No, Sarah. I said no. Todd paused, then slipped the plastic piece into his jacket pocket as if it were natural. If you came here to lie, he said, you picked something too visible. Give it back. Why? It's not yours. Maybe not, but now it kind of is. That was Todd. Not cruel, not heroic, just someone who held on to small advantages until they stopped being small. Sarah stepped closer. I don't have time for this. Neither do I, he said. But I can see you've got a problem, and I can see you're not solving it. You're storing it in your pockets. She exhaled sharply. I just need you to look at the car. I will. But first, does Jerry know anything yet? She hesitated. He saw my car on camera. Todd let out a quiet whistle. Then it's already too late to tighten bolts, he said. This isn't about the car anymore. It's about the story. I didn't ask you to turn it into a story. You didn't, but here it is anyway. He took the plastic from his pocket again, turned it in his fingers, studying the ribbed edge. This isn't from your car. It's from a large bin, Sarah went still. You're sure? I'm a mechanic, not an archaeologist. But yeah, looks like impact against metal and ice. He set it on the workbench, pulled out a small magnetic lamp and lit it up. Under the light, a dark paint mark became visible along the edge. He had noticed. Now the piece wasn't just in her head anymore. You were in his yard this morning, Todd asked. No. Pause. Then why is his grime on your sleeve? Sarah looked down automatically and only then noticed the dark streak near her cuff, the same gray residue that could cling anywhere. Ice, metal, gloves, skin, fabric. She rubbed it. Useless. Todd straightened. Do you even understand what you're doing? I'm trying to stay out of trouble. He smirked. That's exactly how people walk into it. From deeper inside the garage, a young guy in a blue hoodie appeared, holding a cup of coffee, looking like someone handed the wrong task. Todd, there's a call, he said, then noticed Sarah. Oh, hey, she said. Todd took the cup, sipped, handed it back without looking. Who is it? Don't know. Local number said it's about Moon's camera. Sarah felt everything inside tighten. What? She asked. The guy shrugged. Says something doesn't add up about a car too, asking who might be on the recording. Todd slowly turned his head toward Sarah. See, he said calmly, you're not the only one getting nervous. She looked at him and understood the garage was no longer just a garage. Information had already started moving. Who called, she asked. Police, I think, the guy said. The silence after that was louder than shouting. Todd rested his hand on the workbench and tapped his fingers. 1, 2, 3. Then looked at Sarah like someone staring at a malfunction that had suddenly become his problem. All right, he said. Listen carefully. If they haven't tied you to that bin yet, they will soon. Not because they're smart, because you keep walking the trail like you want to be noticed. I need time, Sarah said. Time's leaving, he replied. Evidence stays. He took the plastic piece, pressed it slightly until it cracked further, revealing a white marking on the inside. Broken, but readable. A number. Not complete, but enough. Sarah stared at it, not fully understanding. Todd understood first. That's part of Moon's container, he said quietly. And if this is with you, it doesn't get much worse. Almost. That word hit like cold water. She stepped back. Give it back. Can't, Todd. It's too late, he said. And for the first time, there was no sarcasm in his voice, just something practical, uneasy, like someone realizing he was standing too close to someone else's fire. Sarah turned and walked out without saying goodbye. The cold air hit her face, and only then did she realize she was moving too fast, almost running. Her pocket held nothing but her keys now. But it felt as if something far more important had just been taken from it, the last chance to explain things differently. Behind her, Todd's voice called out Sarah. She stopped but didn't turn. If that shows up with Moon, he said, they won't look at the car, they'll look at you. She stood still, then slowly nodded, and walked to her car. understanding that for the first time, the problem was no longer quiet. Now it had started to ring. The morning began with Sarah finding someone else's glove on her porch. It lay on the top step, wet, clumped with melting snow, its index finger cut off as if someone had once tried to do something very precise and then changed their mind. Sarah stared at it for several seconds without touching it. In this neighborhood, nothing lies around without reason. It's either trash or a warning, and sometimes both. She looked at the street. Empty. Just tire tracks and gray slush, and far down the road, a school bus slowly, almost sleepily, turning the corner. The whole neighborhood looked tired in advance. That at least felt honest. Sarah picked up the glove with 2 fingers and set it on the edge of the trash bin, then went back inside, stood at the sink, and washed her hands for a long time, even though she hadn't touched it with bare skin. The water ran too cold. The kitchen faucet dripped again, each drop hitting the metal sink with the same dull seriousness, like a mark being logged somewhere. Ray had already left. A note remained on the table. "I'll be late. Don't touch my charger." On another day, it would have meant nothing. Now it irritated her almost to tears. People always had important things at the wrong time. Charger, glove, camera, bin, everything blending into one absurd order. The phone rang at 8:44, a local number. Sarah answered immediately, already knowing nothing good would follow. "Ms. Morgan?" a man asked. "Yes, this is Walsh, Municipal Department. We have a question about a container on your street, address Lakeview 214. Sarah said nothing. "Did you by any chance file a request yesterday for a replacement trash bin?" "No." "I see," he said, in a way that suggested he didn't. "Because in our system, the note indicates the damaged container is not on your side, but on Mr. Moon's, and there's a complaint from him as well." Sarah pressed the phone tighter to her ear. "What kind of complaint?" "Noise, displacement of the container, and possible intentional movement." "Intentional? That's what it says. I'm just reading." His tone was so bureaucratically clean it felt awkward to argue. "I didn't move anything," Sarah said. "Understood, then we likely have an address error." And something in her stomach tightened sharply. An address error, a simple, ordinary phrase, exactly the kind that starts everything else. She hung up quickly and reached for her bag, the one with receipts, printouts, the folder, supermarket receipt, utility bill, Ray's note. She spread everything across the table and stared at the line with the address. At first it looked correct. Then she saw it. The name wasn't hers. Mark Wells. Sarah sat down slowly. Mark, the same one she had tried to turn into a convenient distraction. The same one whose bin she had used, hoping the traces would lead elsewhere. And now, somehow, the paperwork had already tied things not to Jerry, but to him. She read the line again. The address was correct. The name was not. That was worse than a completely wrong entry. It meant that somewhere inside the system, a different version of events had already begun to take shape, and it wasn't in her favor. Sarah put on her coat and stepped outside with the expression of someone going to buy milk, though in her bag she carried panic instead of a list. The yards were wet, snow collapsing into dark sludge along the curb. Mark's bin stood in his driveway, the same one, large and green, with a crooked lid. Sarah looked at it and felt a faint, nauseating irritation. The bin had become more important than the people. At least that was how it seemed now. Mark appeared on the porch almost immediately. Work jacket, no hat, hair sticking out in all directions. He looked like someone woken up for no reason. "What are you doing at my place?" he asked. Sarah raised her hand slightly as if to show she wasn't a threat. It always looked pointless. "You can't cancel a threat with your hands. I need to ask about your bin." "What bin?" "Yours." He frowned. "My bin's right there." "I know, I mean paperwork." Bad start. She saw it in the way he became cautious, not aggressive. Cautious was worse. "What? Paperwork? From the city? Did you get a notice?" Mark stepped down one stair, squinting at her. "If this is about trash, I didn't sign anything, and I already spoke with Jerry." Sarah froze. "With Jerry?" "Yeah, he came by last night. Said someone had been around my bin. Very polite about it. Too polite. Makes you want to shut the door." Something inside her tightened. "He came to you?" "Yeah. Said he saw your car. That if I knew anything, better to say it. Calm, like he wasn't talking about trash." Sarah almost asked why Mark had even entertained the conversation, but stopped. The answer was obvious. People talk when they're afraid of being watched, even if they have nothing to say. "What did you tell him?" "What was I supposed to say?" Mark crossed his arms. "That someone's messing with my bin every week. I said I didn't know." He paused, then added more quietly. "He's very interested in who walks around at night. Too interested, that's not normal." It was almost entirely true, which made it worse. "Mark, listen," Sarah said carefully. "Have you had any issues with bins?" "With bins?" "Yes." He looked at her like she was explaining a fire using a soup recipe. "I've got issues with this whole block," he said. "But I only have 2 bins." He opened the door wider and called inside. "Hey, Rita, did you see anything from the city?" A muffled no, and "Don't bother me" came back. Mark turned to Sarah again. "By the way, I got a call yesterday. Insurance, I think. Asked if someone hit my bin with a car. I told them I had no complaints. Then they started asking about Jerry." "About Jerry?" Sarah repeated. "Yeah, and his cameras." Now her mouth went dry. "You're sure? I'm sure I've got a headache now," Mark said. "And someone wants me looking in the wrong direction." Sarah nodded. It sounded exactly right. At that moment, a small white municipal van pulled up. A man in a yellow jacket stepped out with a tablet. Mark straightened instinctively. "Here we go," he muttered. The official approached calmly, speaking with the same careful politeness as everyone else. "Good morning, Mr. Wells?" "Yeah. We're here regarding the container and a discrepancy in the request." "I didn't move anything." The official checked his tablet. "It appears there's a mismatch in placement and possibly in the last request." Mark turned to Sarah. "Did you sign something?" "No, someone did," the official said, "or confirmed by phone." Something in Sarah's chest tightened, a voice, a confirmation, a trace. "I didn't confirm anything," she said. The official nodded but was already looking at Mark's bin. "Then this may be a routing error." "It happens?" "It happens," Mark said, "and now what?" "We either inspect the container or process a transfer, but if there's a damage complaint, that's separate." "Who filed it?" Sarah asked. The official looked up. "Mr. Moon." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. There it was, the wrong bin, wrong name, wrong complaint, all of it already spreading through paperwork like oil through paper. "Jerry filed a complaint about Mark?" she said, hearing how absurd it sounded. "He filed a report of property damage and unauthorized movement," the official replied. "Very properly documented." Properly documented. In this town, even petty hostility came neatly packaged. Mark looked from his porch to the bin, then to Sarah. "Wait, who decided this was my bin? Just because it's here doesn't mean I touched it." "Exactly," the official said. "That's why we're clarifying." And suddenly Sarah understood. Her small setup had worked, but not the way she intended. Not against Mark, not against Jerry, against herself, because now everything made it look like she kept circling other people's bins for reasons that were no longer innocent. At that moment, Mrs. Haas appeared with a bag of bread. "Oh," she said politely. "Problems with the containers again?" No one answered immediately. The question was too accurate and too ridiculous. "We're looking into it," the official said. "That's good," she replied. Sarah looked at her and felt it physically. The whole neighborhood was involved now, not by choice, because bins stood closer to homes than people realized, and everything carried through windows, cameras, half-open doors. The official made a note. "We'll need to verify the time of last movement and possibly review nearby camera footage." The word camera barely changed Sarah's expression, but inside something shifted. That meant Jerry wasn't just watching anymore. He was sharing. "What if I say I didn't touch it at all?" she asked. The official looked at her calmly. "Then we'll record that." That was the worst part. No one was shouting, no one accusing. They were just recording. Sarah turned to Mark. He was angry now, but still at the situation, not at her. "That wouldn't last. You know something?" he asked quietly. "No," she said too quickly. Sarah, she opened her mouth to tell the truth and realized it wouldn't help. Not now. It would only make everything worse. The official waited. Mrs. Haas stood with her bread, patient. Mark shifted his weight. A dog barked somewhere. Everything felt small, crowded, absurd. Sarah said the first thing that came to mind. "Maybe it's the wrong bin." The official raised his eyebrows. "Excuse me. I mean, maybe you're looking at the wrong container." Mark stared at her. "What?" "Maybe the bins look similar," she added weakly. The official paused, checked the tablet, then looked at the bin again. "Ms. Morgan," he said politely, "we're not dealing with visual impressions. We have serial numbers, addresses, and requests, and they match." There was nothing left to argue. Because somewhere, not just the paperwork had aligned, her lie had aligned. The camera, the planted piece, all of it. And now it was collapsing together like wet snow into one heavy, dirty pile. Mark, standing on his porch, was already beginning to understand that the bin in his yard was no longer just a bin. And for the first time, Sarah realized she no longer controlled even the smallest part of it. After the conversation by the bin, Sarah sat in the car for a long time without starting the engine. The yard no longer felt like a yard, but like a place where objects knew too much. Mark's bin stood crooked like an accusation. Jerry's camera blinked red across the street. The official had left, taking no order with him. Only the paper shadow of it, that was worse. Her phone lay in the cup holder. Sarah looked at it, then at its reflection in the windshield, then back again, as if it might explain what to do next. Her hands were cold and damp. From coffee, from fear, it didn't matter anymore. She didn't drive home. Instead, she headed to the eastern edge of town, where garages and warehouses began. low buildings with peeling signs. That's where Vince had his place. He wasn't her friend. He wasn't anyone's friend, really, but he knew how to find things that weren't supposed to be found and how not to ask questions if that was paid for. Sometimes that was enough to be useful. Vince's shop sat behind a used tire store. The snow there was blackened with rubber, and the air smelled of burnt oil and wet metal. A dented van stood outside with its bumper taped on, and a sign that read "Cash Only." A small bell rang too sharply when Sarah pushed the door open. Vince sat by a heater, drinking tea from a cracked mug. He was short, thinning on top, wearing a sweater with stretched elbows, and had the face of someone who never promised more than necessary because promises were already a kind of debt. He looked up, saw Sarah, and immediately understood this wasn't a casual visit. "You look pale," he said. "Thanks. That's not a compliment." She closed the door behind her. "I need you to find something." "What?" "A camera." He raised an eyebrow. "Whose?" "I don't know any. The one covering Jerry's yard or the street or a garage. Someone's already seen my car." Vince didn't look surprised. He just set his mug down. "You think cameras stop being cameras if you don't look at them?" Sarah sat on a worn chair. "I need footage, or access, or someone who knows how to get it." He studied her carefully, the slow look of someone realizing the problem was no longer contained. "What happened?" She shrugged. "Nothing much." "Great answer. Means everything happened." She closed her eyes briefly, then pulled the folder from her bag and set it on the table. Receipts, addresses, a printout from the station, scraps of notes she tried to piece into a timeline. It looked pitiful, like someone trying to explain something serious through coffee expenses. Vince flipped through the papers, paused at one, and gave a low whistle. "Your neighbor likes order." "I know." "No," he breathes it. Sarah looked up. "Can you help or not?" "I can try, but looks like you've already got a problem with addresses." "Addresses?" He tapped the municipal document. "Here, house 2 of 14, and here, the camera installed at 212. Small difference, big consequences." Sarah stared at the page. "That's a mistake." "Yes," he said calmly. "But someone's mistake who wanted it to stay unnoticed." He stood, walked to the window, glanced outside, and came back. "You setting someone up, Sarah?" She snapped her head up. "No, that wasn't moral judgment. That was scale." She said nothing. Vince didn't push. The heater hummed. Somewhere water dripped into a container, the sound oddly steady. She began, and stopped. At that moment, a delivery guy came in, young, red ears, holding a package. "This came for you," he said to Vince, signed to Wells. Vince took the box, set it on the table, and looked at it like it might be either a spare part or the start of trouble. Sarah tensed. "Wells, Mark?" The courier shrugged. "Address is his or yours. Name, Moon was on it too, I think." "I didn't check closely." Vince examined the label, then glanced at Sarah. "Well, that's convenient," he said flatly. "Now, even the mail's involved." He sliced the tape open. Inside, a cheap digital recorder, wires, a folded instruction sheet. Sarah immediately knew it wasn't just equipment. It was an attempt to place eyes where they didn't belong. Vince unfolded a paper and whistled again. "Interesting." "What?" Address was changed manually, not very cleanly. Sarah stood. "Let me see." He handed it to her. Printed address for Jerry, then crossed out, replaced by Mark's number in uneven handwriting. Next to it, a signature that looked disturbingly like her own name. Her stomach dropped. "That's not me. I didn't say it was." She stared at it, realizing someone had already built a quiet, careful lie around her identity. Not dramatic, not loud, the kind that lasted. "Where did this come from?" she asked. "Courier." Someone gave him the wrong number. Then corrected it again. He ended up here. Who corrected it? That's the interesting part. Vince sat back. I'd start with Jerry, or whoever installed his cameras, or whoever likes paperwork more than people. Sarah thought of Officer Helms, his calm voice, the tablet, the polite ma'am, and felt uneasy. "The police are already watching me," she said. Vince nodded. "Then you really shouldn't be handing out reasons." He leaned into the box again, pulled out a small plastic flash drive hidden among the wires. Sarah froze. "What is that?" "That," he said. "Looks like the reason someone didn't want confusion." He plugged it into an old laptop. The screen flickered, then opened a folder. Files labeled Driveway 1, Backyard 2, Moon 9 p.m. Vince opened one. Night footage, yard, cars, bins, streetlight. Then Sarah's figure near Jerry's house. Then another figure, a shadow by the fence. Sarah felt something cold rise in her throat. "That from his camera?" she asked. "Looks like it." The clip was short, but there was clearly someone else. A woman in a jacket moving quickly along the fence, pausing at the bin, then disappearing. "Who is that?" Sarah asked quietly. Vince didn't answer right away. Timestamp says, "Before you're hit." So someone else was already there. Sarah stared at the screen. "What does that mean?" "It means someone was at that bin before you, and maybe not for the bin." Everything started to align wrongly, but logically. The camera, the address swap, the paperwork, the woman, Jerry, the official trail. The only accident was her driving into it. Vince closed the video. One more thing. He opened another file, audio this time, static, then a male voice, flat official. If you want this handled quietly, route it through Moon. He won't look too closely. Just don't touch 214. That one's already had activity. Sarah felt ice crawl up her spine. She knew the voice. Officer Helms. Vince paused the file. Well, he said quietly, this isn't about trash. Silence filled the room. Even the heater seemed to stop. Sarah sat slowly. He knew, she said. Looks like it. And Jerry? Jerry probably just loves cameras more than calm. Sarah stared at the frozen screen, replaying every polite phrase, every pause, every don't worry, and suddenly understood she hadn't just been suspected. She had already been placed into someone else's system, small, clean, bureaucratic. Where was this recorded, she asked. Vince pointed at the file, backyard cam at Moon's place, probably, but the timestamp's off, like someone edited and restored it. Sarah stood. So someone knows. Yes, what do I do? Vince looked at her with tired caution. Don't go to Moon alone, and don't talk to Helms unless you have to. That's not advice. That's what you get for free. She nodded, looked at the box, the flash drive, the frozen frame of night. A small connection. Camera, recorder, wrong address, false signature. Thin lines, but enough to pull everything apart. As she reached the door, Vince called after her. Sarah. She turned. If you see that woman again, don't pretend you didn't. That's usually a bad plan. She said nothing, just stepped out into the cold, where the snow was already melting into dirty water, and for the first time, along with fear, she felt something else. A quiet anger. An anger, if you don't stop it, tends to keep going on its own. The municipal office was housed in a building that must once have been considered modern, but now looked like it had long since been forgotten and simply kept running out of habit. The hallway smelled of wet coats, old paint, and vending machine coffee. The ceiling lights were steady, without warmth, the kind you find in places where nothing is promised except schedules and forms. Sarah arrived after a short sleep that hadn't refreshed her, only made the morning heavier. She had stood in front of the mirror for a long time, then chose a gray coat, the kind that hid stains, and carefully placed the folder into her bag. The folder felt heavier now, not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. Receipts, statements, camera printouts, addresses, and one sheet with Vince's audio note she still hadn't dared to replay. Paper made lies official. That was what made it frightening. A woman with short hair sat at the reception desk, a plastic name badge slipping sideways as she sorted paper clips. You're here for Walsh? She asked. Yes, I had an appointment. The woman checked a list. He's busy. You'll have to wait. Tea, water. Sarah almost laughed. For 2 days now, tea kept appearing where there should have been explanations or threats. No, thank you. We have lemon. No, a shrug, the kind that meant it didn't matter either way. She gestured to the row of chairs. Sarah sat. The plastic seat felt cold even through her coat. Across from her hung a sign, please maintain order. Beneath it, a notice about changes to trash collection days that irritated her most of all. In a place where addresses were being altered and cameras were recording too much, they still reminded people about garbage schedules, as if that were the real risk. After 10 minutes, she was called in. Walsh's office was small but tidy, a box of files, a travel mug, a tray of untouched cookies. Walsh himself was in his 50s, smooth forehead, careful hands. He had the calm of someone who could say, we'll look into it, even when there was no intention of looking. Ms. Morgan, he said, standing, thank you for coming. Of course, please, sit. She sat. He opened a folder, adjusted his glasses, folded his hands, and looked at her as if he already knew the answer, but wanted her to feel the delay. We've encountered some confusion across several requests, he said. Confusion? Yes. Nothing serious in a technical sense. Just discrepancies in house numbers, container assignments, and initiators. Sarah felt something cold rise in her chest. Initiators? Yes. Your request, as it turns out, was not submitted by you? She blinked. What do you mean, not by me? He slid a sheet toward her. A call log, voice unverified, but the address matches yours. The house number neighboring. She leaned in, her name printed neatly next to someone else's address. It looked like someone had tried very hard not to make a mistake and failed more deeply. I didn't file this, she said. I understand it may have been submitted on your behalf, or transferred. Transferred? Sometimes data flows into the wrong channel. The phrase was so ordinary, it made her want to slam the table. Not out of anger, out of helplessness against that careful bureaucratic dullness. Then why am I here, she asked. Because we have overlap with Mr. Moon's complaint and camera footage involving your vehicle. Also, he glanced at the file. There's a related issue with Mr. Wells's container. She froze. Wells? Yes. Why Wells? He turned the page. A diagram of the street, arrows, pencil notes. According to records, the container was moved toward his property. Initially, the complaint concerned Moon's bin, but someone later marked it as relocated near Wells's address, which triggered another report. She stared at the diagram. The trail had changed. Not in theory, in fact. Who? She asked quietly. Walsh lifted his shoulders. That's what we're determining. He spoke calmly, too calmly. His politeness was precise, and that precision felt cruel. He wasn't raising his voice. He wasn't accusing. He was simply explaining that the system worked, even if that work meant grinding someone down. The desk phone rang. He excused himself, listened, said, understood, and hung up. Apologies, we also have a police request. Sarah's breath caught. What request? He looked at her more closely. Regarding footage from Mr. Moon's camera and an individual who may have been present before your incident. The woman from the footage flashed in Sarah's mind. Quick movement, hood, fence, so someone had been there before. You found the footage? She asked. Part of it? Not all. It appears segments were overwritten. By whom? Unknown. He handed her another sheet, a transcript. Sarah's stomach dropped. It was a departmental call log. Among the participants, county office, department, and Helms. What is this? She asked. Internal record. It concerns the handling of the complaint tied to your address. She read a line, then another. Routed through Moon, don't touch 214. That location already had activity. She looked up. That's Officer Helms, by voice. Yes, procedurally it remains internal. Internal? She repeated. We can't act on unverified transcripts. It requires formal confirmation. She stared at him. Internal? Unverified formal words that could hide anything if spoken calmly enough. So you know it's there, she said, but you can't act until it's official. Essentially, she gave a short, dry laugh. I'm sorry, it's just absurd. I understand, Walsh said. He didn't. He opened a drawer, took out a gray folder, and placed it on the desk. We've assembled a preliminary file. Your request, Mr. Moon's complaint? The routing issue. Sarah looked at it. A file? Yes. A working set, for now. She reached for it, but he held it a moment longer. There's also a still image from the camera, and a preliminary list of individuals seen on the property. Who was there? A pause. Not fully established. But there's mention of a woman not listed as a resident. Sarah gripped the edge of the desk. The one from the footage? Likely. And you're only telling me now? We avoid premature conclusions. They complicate things. He handed her the folder. It was heavier than expected. The papers inside sounded dry, detached, no longer hers despite her name on the cover. One more detail, he said as she stood. There was an additional call last night regarding your address. She looked up slowly. From whom? Unconfirmed. Female voice. She stated the bin had been out of place before your incident. Everything inside her paused. A woman? Yes. Do you know who? He shook his head. No. But she requested it not be included in the main report, if, as she put it, you don't want to deal with extra trash later. The phrase landed quietly, too quietly. Mrs. Haas came to mind, not because she was guilty, but because people like her always knew more than they said, and spoke only when it was already too late. That's all? Sarah asked. For today, yes? She stood holding the folder against her chest. At the door she paused. Honestly, where does this leave me? Walsh didn't answer immediately. In an uncomfortable position, he said finally, but not necessarily catastrophic. Yet sounded like a formality with no protection behind it. Sarah walked back through the hallway, past the receptionist, past the sign about order. Someone offered tea again. No, thank you. Water? No. Good luck then. Luck. Another polite reflex. Outside, the cold hit her face, but it didn't clear anything. She sat in the car, placed the folder on the passenger seat, and stayed still for a long moment. Then she pulled out the transcript again. 214 movement, moon. And suddenly she realized something. She had been looking for a large, hidden scheme. But this felt smaller. Someone's convenience, someone's minor interest, poorly filed, poorly hidden. She started the engine. The question was no longer who saw her car. The question was who decided she was the easiest name to leave in the report. The warehouse stood by an old freight junction where the road no longer led anywhere respectable. A low, corrugated metal building, a rusted sign with no name, dirty snow piled near the gates, an empty loading lot where nothing had moved in years. The light above the entrance flickered stubbornly, as if trying to warn someone, but without the strength to do it properly. Sarah arrived just before midnight and switched off her headlights at once. Not to hide. Hiding was already pointless. but because extra light only made her more exposed, the car smelled of cold plastic stale coffee and the paper from the folder on the passenger seat. She hadn't felt her fingertips for an hour. That helped. Fear works worse when the body is too alive. A single lamp glowed at the neighboring building. It made the snow look dirtier than it was, and the shadows shorter, sharper. Somewhere far off, a truck passed, the sound fading into nothing. Sarah checked the time, 5 to 12. She pulled out her phone. No messages. That meant nothing. Messages no longer came when expected. They arrived after everything had already gone wrong. At midnight, Mark Wells emerged from the dark on the right. He walked fast, hood up, hands in his pockets, looking like someone who didn't want to be here, but already knew explanations wouldn't help. Behind him came Jerry Moon. He moved calmly, almost neatly, as if attending a neighborhood meeting instead of a midnight gathering on an empty lot. Even his jacket was clean. That irritated her. Todd appeared next, keeping slightly to the side. Not pushing forward, not blending into the dark either. He carried the quiet look of a middleman who already knew things would end badly and just didn't want to look unnecessary. Last came a white municipal SUV. Officer Helms stepped out. No rush, no hesitation. Like a man who believed everything had already been calculated. Sarah watched them and felt something strange. None of them looked like villains, and that made it worse. Jerry with his cameras and calm voice. Mark, perpetually annoyed at the whole block. Todd, hands in pockets, just helping Helms, too polite, too even. People like that finish things because they believed they were maintaining order. Well, Mark said, breaking the silence. Nice turnout, shame there's no tea. It sounded dry, almost stupid. No one smiled. Helms nodded as if it were appropriate. Thank you for coming. It's better to speak calmly. Calmly, Jerry repeated. You called a meeting at midnight in a warehouse yard. Given the circumstances, this was neutral ground. Neutral, Todd murmured. Great word. Sarah stepped out of the car. All heads turned at once, not sharply, not aggressively, not like she was prey or enemy, like she was a knot that couldn't be untied cleanly anymore. Thank you for coming, Sarah, Helms said. You invited me? I asked everyone connected to the incident. It helps when people speak face to face. For whom, she asked. For order. The word landed again, heavy and hollow. Mark snorted. You people and your order. What's it gotten you? Helms ignored him. He pulled a thin gray folder from his coat and set it on the hood of his car. Let's not waste time. We have footage, a complaint, address discrepancies, and the fact that Mr. Moon's container was moved. Bin, Mark muttered. Excuse me? Nothing. Just been all evening. Now container. Sounds more official. Helms turned a page. Sarah Morgan was at Mr. Moon's property at the time of the incident, then at Mr. Wells, then at Mr. Blaine's garage, and each location resulted in additional reports. This is no longer an accident. Sarah felt the cold settle fully inside her. You put me there, she said. I? Not just you. Someone from your office. Maybe you. There's a recording. Your voice. Silence fell. Even the distant road seemed to pause. Helms tilted his head slightly. That's an accusation. No, she said. That's exhaustion. Todd stepped forward. Let's skip the dance. She has copies, audio paper. Vince has it too. If you thought she'd just go home with this, you wasted your evening. Helms glanced at him. Vince? Yeah, Todd said. Useful guy. Jerry finally spoke. Wait, you were trying to pin this on me? He looked between Sarah and Helms. Over a bin? Mark gave a short laugh. Now it's getting interesting. Jerry turned on him. Interesting? You've been calling me all day about someone near your container? Then paperwork shows up. Then people come to me. Then someone's walking around at night, and now you're standing here amused? I'm not amused, Mark said. I just don't want to be the only idiot here. It was rough, but underneath was fatigue and fear. Everyone had their own kind. Helms stepped forward slightly. This is simple. There was an attempt to conceal the movement of the container. A false report of damage. Camera evidence. We need to determine who initiated the substitution. Sarah looked at him and saw the mechanism behind him. Forms, calls, routes, addresses. Everything arranged so no one could say it wasn't procedural. The most dangerous lie was the one that looked like paperwork. You know who did it, she said. Helms didn't answer. You know, she repeated. I'm not obligated to discuss internal information here. She nodded. Of course, not here. Not in front of people. Convenient. At that moment, Jerry pulled out his phone. I have footage, he said. Didn't plan to show it. But enough. He tapped the screen, then turned it outward. A woman by the bin. Not Sarah. Not Mark. A hooded figure, bumping the fence, glancing at the road, quickly placing something into the container. Sarah tensed. Who is that? Jerry lowered the phone, slowly. My ex-wife, he said. Linda, she works in the same office as Walsh, and I think she filed one of the requests. The silence thickened. Mark cursed under his breath. So that's it, and we thought this was about a bin. For the first time, Helm's expression shifted. Barely, but enough. He recognized the name before Jerry finished. You knew? Sarah asked. That's not relevant. It is, she cut in. Everything is. Say it. He didn't. Todd reached into his pocket and pulled out a flash drive. And this, he said calmly, isn't about wives or addresses. It's a copy from the recorder, Helm's voice, and hers talking about not touching 214 until things settle. Sarah stared. Where did you get that? Vince shares. I copy. Helms looked at the drive like it had insulted him. That's unauthorized. And the bin wasn't? Mark shot back. It wasn't funny, but it broke something open. The careful structure collapsed into something smaller, messier, not a grand scheme. Just a clumsy attempt to hide a bureaucratic mistake and push it onto whoever was easiest. Sarah stepped forward. No trembling now. Who filed the first request? Silence? Who? Jerry exhaled slowly. My ex, Linda? She didn't want that area checked. There was something else going on, not the bin. She used my name to quiet it. I didn't know it would reach you. What was there? Sarah asked. He hesitated. Nothing you need to know. She laughed. Sharp, tired, angry. Exactly. Nothing I need to know. And everything grew from that. Helms reached for the folder, but Todd stepped slightly in front of him. Not dramatic, just enough. Sarah met Helms' eyes. Put the folder away, she said quietly, or everyone here hears how your order actually works. He looked at her, then at Jerry, Mark, Todd, the car, the empty lot, and understood he hadn't lost because he was exposed. He had lost because there were witnesses, and in a place like this, witnesses mattered more than procedure. Helms closed the folder. This can still be handled officially, he said. No, Sarah replied. Not anymore. At that moment, a loud metallic crash echoed from the warehouse, then another, something falling. Everyone turned. Sarah already knew, just when things were about to settle into paperwork, something always broke, and the night at the warehouse finally began to consume its own mistakes. After the warehouse, Sarah barely remembered how she got home. Only the headlights in the mirror, the cold steering wheel, her own breathing, and the feeling that the night behind her hadn't let go, still tugging at her shoulder, demanding she come back and finish what had started. At some point she stopped at an empty gas station, bought coffee from a machine, didn't taste it, and spilled half of it on her sleeve. It didn't seem important. The sleeve dried, the sticky gray fatigue stayed. The house met her with silence. Not a warm lived-in silence, the kind that follows someone else's mistake. Ray hadn't been home, or had come late and left early. His cup sat upside down in the sink. A pharmacy receipt lay on the table beside his keys, the ones he always dropped too loudly, as if to remind the house he was still there. Now they lay quietly. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and pulled off her boots without untying them. Then she stared at her hands, dry dirt along the knuckles. A black trace under her nails that didn't wash out right away. She scrubbed it until her skin turned red. Then again, useless. The water ran cold, as if the house had decided not to participate. She didn't sleep. Not insomnia, something heavier. The body tired but never dropped. She sat in the kitchen, drank water, listened to the refrigerator cycling on and off with the same indifferent sound. Outside, dawn crept in, not beautifully, just making things visible. That felt almost insulting. The gray-blue folder from the municipal office lay on the table. She had brought it from the warehouse, tried to put it away, and failed. It stayed in sight, like something that no longer allowed distance. Sarah opened it, spread the papers out, and instead of fear, felt a cold, almost accounting clarity. The pages were brutally logical. Her phone number, her address, Moon's complaint, the internal call, the note about 214, the camera still, the rerouted request. The story wasn't dramatic. It was a badly filed case someone wanted to bury under technical error. Her hands weren't shaking anymore, not relief. The opposite of panic, when fear burns out and leaves only decisions. She took out the audio transcript. Didn't want to listen again, but did. Don't touch 214. There's already been movement. And beneath it, quieter. If this hits the report, it all lands on Moon. He won't dig deeper. She turned it off and stared at the dark window. Her reflection pale, hair damp at the temples, sweater misshapen, didn't look broken. Just exhausted past the point of collapse. That mattered. She called Vince. He picked up after a few rings. Yeah, it's me. I figured. It's 6 in the morning, almost. Your favorite time for bad news? I need you to check that recording again. Pause. The Helms one? Yes. And I need to know more about Linda Moon. A long exhale. You didn't sleep? No, come by and get real coffee first, not that burnt water you drink. She thanked him, hung up, and stood at the sink, watching the faucet drip. Drip! Pause. Drip. She caught herself measuring the intervals, as if that might build a plan. She dressed slowly, not out of hesitation, but because rushing after a sleepless night felt wrong. Coat on, phone in one pocket, keys, and the small tape measure in the other. The tape measure wasn't just an object anymore. It was a reminder that small precision could turn into disaster. At the window, she paused. For the first time in hours, the yard looked ordinary. Tire tracks, a bin, a broken scooter by the fence, a slice of yellow light from a street lamp, ordinary details, ordinary neglect. And still, inside that ordinariness, something had gone wrong enough that no one could pretend otherwise. On the way to Vince's, she stopped at a 24-hour cafe by a gas station. The air smelled of reheated milk and damp paper cups. A woman in a blue sweater stood behind the counter, tired but not unkind. Long night, she asked. Sarah almost said everything. Instead, something like that. The woman nodded. Large coffee? Yes. Milk? Yes. Sugar? No. She set the cup down and added casually. Sometimes when you don't sleep, nothing feels that bad anymore. Then you sleep and everything's bad again. Strange system. Sarah almost smiled. Thank you. At Vince's, the light was on. It always felt temporary there. He had papers spread out, a laptop open, real coffee waiting. Sit, he said, and don't pretend you're fine. She sat. Linda Moon works in the county office, he said, flipping through documents. Not high up, not low. The kind of job that keeps everything running quietly. She changed the address? Looks like it, probably not alone. He showed her a page, Tupsnanks, calls, internal notes, Helms, Walsh, Linda Moon, and one line, informal adjustment of request, 214. So it didn't start with me, Sarah said. No, it started with someone's small problem and a decision not to file it properly. And they put it on me. Looks that way. Another page, camera installation records, contractor details. Same contractor worked for both the office and Jerry, Vince said. Small circle. Sarah leaned in. She didn't want anyone to see the bin had been touched before me. Or the bin wasn't the point at all. That landed hard, but cleanly. Sarah flipped another sheet, then stopped. On the internal call log, operator name, Linda Moon. Not hidden, just small. She made the call, Sarah said. Yes. She knew about 214. Yes. Then Helms wasn't just covering her. Vince looked at her. He was covering the whole chain. Sarah pressed the paper slightly, creasing the edge. I want to talk to her. Linda? Yes. Why? She met his eyes. Because if she started it, she knows how it ends, or who's lying without flinching. Vince nodded. That sounds like a plan. Sarah exhaled slowly, the first steady breath in hours. Not relief, alignment. She wasn't running anymore. She stood by the window. Morning had fully arrived. The neighborhood looked calm, ordinary, alive. But now she knew nothing would be fixed quietly, not with politeness, not with apologies. She went back to the table, took a sip of coffee. Here's how it goes, she said evenly. Linda first, then Helms, then Walsh. And if anyone tries to reduce this to a trash bin again, I'll explain what real disorder looks like. Vince looked at her with something like respect. That's you. She didn't smile, but something inside her had settled. Not hope, not victory, just position. Outside, a woman passed with groceries. Someone rolled a bin to the curb. A car door slammed. An ordinary morning, except now it couldn't hide anything anymore. The sleepless night hadn't ended. It had just changed shape. Do you even understand what she did? He said, nodding at Linda. She interfered with a warehouse check. Not a bin, a real check. Linda closed her eyes briefly. You always think it's small, quiet, heavy. Sarah watched them and saw not enemies, but a domestic fracture spilling outward, a quiet decision, a shifted form, a misplaced name, and her standing in the middle of it because she had hesitated. So where do I fit? Sarah asked. Linda looked directly at her. You were already on the footage and you came back. You tried to fix it yourself. That made you useful. Sarah felt something settle. Not anger, not fear. Understanding. You chose me, she said. Yes, no cruelty. That made it worse. Walsh stepped in quickly. What matters is documenting facts. We have falsified routing, interference, and a procedural breach. Careful wording, Mark muttered. A thin, nervous ripple of sound passed through the room. Then silence again. Todd placed the flash drive on the table. This has the audio, he said. Not interpretation, just sound. Helm's expression tightened. You had no authority to obtain that. And you had no authority to pretend nothing was happening, Todd replied. It wasn't dramatic. That made it land harder. Sarah stepped forward. One question, she said. Who decided I was the easiest to leave in the report? Silence. Then Linda spoke. I did. No hesitation. I saw your car. I needed something that would hold, something that wouldn't be questioned right away. Why? Sarah asked. To buy time, Linda said. To remove the warehouse records, the account. Another entry. Helms exhaled sharply. Linda, she didn't stop. At the back, a radio crackled. One of the officers shifted position. Helms straightened. A formal report will be filed, he said. Everything here will be recorded. Good, Sarah said. Her voice was flat now. Then write this too. I drove away, and the rest of you decided that was convenient. Silence followed. Not dramatic, just final. Helms looked away. Linda lowered her head. Jerry stood still, emptied of words. Mark stared at the floor, unsure whether to argue or leave. Outside, a siren sounded. Low, routine. Another vehicle pulled in. Walsh closed his folder slowly. Formally, he said. This isn't concluded. Formally, Sarah repeated. The word had changed. No longer polite, just precise. Footsteps approached. The door opened. Names were called. More people entered. The official version of reality, arriving late. Sarah stood in the center of the room looking at the folder, the flash drive, the map. It had started with a trash bin. Now it had a record, a signature, and people who could no longer pretend it was small. The municipal hall stood on the edge of town, next to the library, and an empty parking lot where snow was always trampled into gray slush. During the day, residents gathered there to argue about pipes, parking, and who failed to clear their steps. By evening, the place stopped feeling like authority and started to feel like a room where other people's problems had been stored too long and finally dragged into the light. Sarah arrived early. She sat in her car with the folder on her lap, watching people drift inside. 2 officers, a clerk with cropped hair, Mark Wells looking like he'd been called for the wrong reason, and Jerry Moon composed, slow, in a clean jacket, as if this were dinner, not a reckoning. She saw Helms, too, walking in with a folder tucked under his arm, steady as someone still hoping paperwork might outweigh facts. She entered last. That turned out to be right. Everyone was already inside, standing or seated along the walls. Her arrival gathered their attention without a word. In the center were 2 tables, a few chairs, and a worn projector no one had bothered to turn on. One table held Walsh's blue folder, the other a scatter of printouts, camera stills, forms, copies. Paper as weapon and shield, it made the room feel worse. Walsh opened the meeting, quiet, polite, too careful. Thank you for coming. We're here to clarify the sequence of requests regarding the container on Lakeview. No need for alarm, just aligning the data. It almost sounded ironic. No one smiled. Mark crossed his arms. Jerry remained standing, watching Walsh like he no longer believed a word. Sarah placed her folder on the table. Skip the alignment, she said. Show who filed what. Walsh hesitated, then nodded to an officer. The projector flickered on a white rectangle, then a table, a street map, a call log, official, clean. That made it worse. The first call, Walsh said, was logged under Linda Moon. County office, request to review container placement. Second, from Mr. Moon regarding damage. Third, internal. Officer Helms. Helms stood against the wall, arms folded. Still, Mark let out a quiet breath. Of course, Sarah stepped closer, paused there. Walsh looked at her. Which line? The address correction? They froze the frame. Next to 214, a handwritten note moved to Wells. Sarah stared. Who wrote that? Walsh opened his mouth, closed it. From the back, a woman stood, Linda Moon. Smaller than Sarah expected, composed, tired. She didn't look like a culprit. She looked like paperwork. Thin, precise, worn down by repetition. I did, she said. The room stilled. Jerry turned sharply. What? I wrote it, Linda repeated. The adjustment, the request. What exactly did you write? He asked. Quieter now. The address, the transfer. Mark gave a humorless sound. Well, that's something. Linda didn't look at him. There wasn't supposed to be movement, she said. Only paperwork, but it didn't stay there. The air shifted. The story moved away from bins and dents and into something smaller and worse. What movement? Sarah asked. Linda looked at her. There was already a separate issue at 214, a warehouse check, financial records. I didn't want it tied to Moon. So you redirected it, Sarah said. Linda nodded, just enough to push it aside. I thought the department would handle it quietly. And who were you pushing it onto? Mark asked. No one. I wanted it to look like confusion. Great job, Todd said from the doorway, hands in pockets. He'd been brought in for technical details, but looked like he was watching a collapse. Helms stepped forward. That doesn't explain unauthorized access to recordings. Linda turned to him. And you didn't explain it either. Tension tightened. Even Walsh faltered. Please, he said. Let's keep order. Sarah almost smiled. Order wasn't helping anymore. She took out the audio transcript and placed it in front of Walsh. There's your order, she said. And here's your voice, officer. Helms looked at the page but didn't touch it. That's an internal conversation. Internal, Mark said. You were deciding how to pin it on Moon. Jerry snapped toward him. I didn't pin anything. No, Mark said. It just all landed near you by coincidence. Jerry's composure cracked. Do you even understand what she did, he said, nodding at Linda. She interfered with a warehouse check, not a bin, a real check. Linda closed her eyes briefly. You always think it's small, quiet, heavy. Sarah watched them and saw not enemies, but a domestic fracture spilling outward, a quiet decision, a shifted form, a misplaced name, and her standing in the middle of it because she had hesitated. So where do I fit? Sarah asked. Linda looked directly at her. You were already on the footage, and you came back. You tried to fix it yourself. That made you useful. Sarah felt something settle. Not anger, not fear. Understanding you chose me, she said. Yes, no cruelty. That made it worse. Walsh stepped in quickly. What matters is documenting facts. We have falsified routing, interference, and a procedural breach. Careful wording, Mark muttered. A thin, nervous ripple of sound passed through the room, then silence again. Todd placed the flash drive on the table. This has the audio, he said. Not interpretation, just sound. Helm's expression tightened. You had no authority to obtain that, and you had no authority to pretend nothing was happening. Todd replied. It wasn't dramatic. That made it land harder. Sarah stepped forward. One question, she said. Who decided I was the easiest to leave in the report? Silence. Then Linda spoke. I did. No hesitation. I saw your car. I needed something that would hold, something that wouldn't be questioned right away. Why? Sarah asked. To buy time, Linda said, to remove the warehouse records, the account. Another entry. Helms exhaled sharply. Linda, she didn't stop. At the back, a radio crackled. One of the officers shifted position. Helms straightened. A formal report will be filed, he said. Everything here will be recorded. Good, Sarah said. Her voice was flat now. Then write this too. I drove away, and the rest of you decided that was convenient. Silence followed. Not dramatic. Just final. Helms looked away. Linda lowered her head. Jerry stood still, emptied of words. Mark stared at the floor, unsure whether to argue or leave. Outside, a siren sounded. Low, routine. Another vehicle pulled in. Walsh closed his folder slowly. Formally, he said. This isn't concluded. Formally, Sarah repeated. The word had changed. No longer polite, just precise. Footsteps approached. The door opened. Names were called. More people entered. The official version of reality arriving late. Sarah stood in the center of the room, looking at the folder. The flash drive, the map. It had started with a trash bin. Now it had a record, a signature, and people who could no longer pretend it was small. It took 3 weeks for the house to become truly quiet. Not empty. Emptiness takes effort. Just quiet, the ordinary kind, like in homes where people stop waiting for a knock in the night and start hearing the refrigerator again. Sarah didn't notice it right away. At first, it felt like the silence was hiding, like snow under dirt. Then she understood. It had returned, but it wasn't the same. She started waking before the alarm, not because she was rested. Sleep had become short and heavy, like a lid that never quite closed, but because her body no longer trusted the night. She would go to the kitchen, turn on the kettle, check her phone out of habit. Messages were rare now and always dull. A lawyer, insurance, a dry notification from the police, a brief call from Walsh asking to review one more form. The word review now caused something close to irritation. A new box sat on the table, plain cardboard archive gray with a label in black marker, case 214, Moon Morgan. Beneath it, a faded older label, service requests. Sarah looked at it every day, though she opened it rarely. When she did, the papers rustled, and that sound still brought a brief cold under her shoulder blades. The box was an outcome, not a resolution, the kind of outcome small towns prefer. Everything collected, labeled, dated, and put away. They don't solve things. They archive them. They don't heal. They store and call it later. Ray came back a week after everything ended. No scene, no conversation. He walked in with groceries, set them down and said, I saw the news. Sarah nodded. He didn't ask if she was at fault. She didn't ask if he forgave her. Between them, something had settled, not distance, but silence that simply became part of the room. He slept in the guest room now, left his mug in the same place, just more quietly. That was the only trace of before. Jerry Moon still stepped out onto his porch most days. Not like a neighbor, like someone who didn't know what to do with his own politeness anymore. He removed the camera, installed a new one, removed that too. People watched him carefully now, not accusingly, just aware. His ex-wife Linda filed her statement first and left her job. No drama, Just a folder closed, a pass returned, a thermos taken home. Some said transfer, some said dismissal. In a small town, endings are always retold differently. Helms disappeared more quietly than anyone. No arrest at first, just internal review, procedural language, long pauses. Then he simply stopped appearing. Official wording, suspended pending investigation. It sounded almost respectable if you didn't know what followed. His name was spoken now, the way people spoke about an early winner. Walsh stayed, became even more careful, slower speech, more checks. Too many uses of the word order, like someone who had learned too late that order protects nothing. He sent Sarah the final report in a thick gray envelope. The first page read, "Cause incorrect service request initiated outside standard procedure." She read that line 5 times. It never improved. The truth in the end was almost ridiculous. A small bureaucratic fear. Linda Moon had learned that a routine check was coming for the warehouse at 214. Nothing dramatic, just paperwork, numbers that didn't line up, a missing signature, a questionable account. She tried to redirect attention. A small administrative move. Someone else carried it further. Someone entered the wrong address. Someone said, "Don't touch 214, and then no one wanted to be the first to admit the error. Sarah learned it piece by piece. From Vince, from Walsh, from the report. Each detail made it less frightening and more irritating. Because frightening things at least feel justified. This had been small, careless, and still, it had nearly broken everything. If she had called that first night, if she hadn't measured, hadn't returned, hadn't tried to correct it, might have stayed small. That thought stayed with her the longest. Not because it helped, because it didn't. The tape measure keychain now lay in the kitchen drawer among keys and paper clips. She picked it up sometimes, thought about throwing it away, never did. Objects don't become guilty, they just stop being trivial. The click of it no longer sounded ordinary, it sounded precise. Final, the yard hadn't changed. The bins stood where they always had. Snow still turned gray at the curb. Dogs barked at nothing, but people had shifted. No one lingered too long on someone else's steps. No one knocked late. Conversation stayed safe, weather, salt, blood pressure. Even Mrs. Haas greeted Sarah more quietly now, as if respecting not her. But what had happened? One morning, Sarah found a glove on the porch again, this time intact, warm black. She froze for a moment, then picked it up and realized it was Ray's. She brought it inside and left it by the door. That evening he saw it. "Mine," he said. "I figured. No need to call the police this time?" She almost smiled. Not yet. That was enough. Sometimes she still thought about the first night, the bin, the camera, the sound of impact. But now it wasn't a pit. It was a box, labeled, contained, that mattered. At the end of the month, Walsh called to say the case was officially closed. The language was dull, almost ceremonial in its dullness. Linda, disciplinary action and transfer. Helms, suspension, likely dismissal. Jerry, fine for withholding information. Mark, an apology and a new bin. Sarah listened by the window. None of it undid anything. It just arranged it. She thanked Walsh and hung up. Outside, Jerry's bin stood straight again. Cameras blinked, faint red lights. Snow melted into thin gray streams, running toward the drain, as if the town were trying to wash something it couldn't explain. Sarah picked up the tape measure, clicked it once, and put it back in the drawer, closed it carefully. The refrigerator hummed. Ray washed a cup, a car passed. Life continued. That was the only certainty left. It doesn't stop when someone puts a mistake in the wrong bin. It just pretends nothing happened, while the case sits in a box, labeled, fading slightly at the edges. And sooner or later, someone decides again that it's not worth making into a problem.